This is Freewell's Mega Limited Edition 16-pack set of filters for the DJI Mini 4 Pro. There are a lot of filters here which I will explore in future videos, but today I'd like to show you a few examples of where they have actually made a noticeable difference, as well as one thing that surprised me. To install a filter, you'll need to first remove the lens guard by stabilizing the camera with one hand and twisting off the guard with the other hand. Now you can position the filter slightly askew over the lens and then twist it back on to lock it in place. There are no gimbal overload problems with these filters, so the weight is not a concern. Also, the gimbal guard fits nicely with these filters installed. In this first example here, I did a waypoint mission with the Mini 4 Pro so that I could compare several filters with a similar flight path. The clouds did change the lighting a little bit, but overall you can get a sense of some differences. I'll start off with the ND16, and keep in mind that one reason to use an ND filter at all is to increase your motion blur by darkening the image and allowing you to decrease the shutter speed. But in this particular example, there isn't much fast motion to really see the difference easily, but the polarized ND16 seemed to let us see a little bit below the surface of the water on the shoreline. I also tried the mist filter, which is kind of interesting. It softens the highlights and reduces the contrast a bit. I'll definitely experiment with that later. And then the UV filter actually seemed to make the water more vibrant. So that was unexpected. I didn't think I'd notice much of a difference. At this second location, I wanted to see if I can get some subtle but noticeable motion blur. So again, I created a waypoint mission and did a flight without a filter, making sure that I had a lot of motion happening in the background. Then I switched to an ND64, and looking back at this, I could have probably gone with the next one up, the ND128 or maybe even 256. Because there is some motion blur. You can definitely see it when I pause and compare the two, but looking at it now, it's not quite enough. When I tried the ND64 polarizing filter, making sure that the little arrow is lined up for maximum polarization, I noticed that the blue in the sky is a bit more vibrant and slightly darker, but I think that looks good. If you're flying a couple hundred feet high, using an ND filter might not make much of a difference, as you can see here. This was with the ND64. But when I fly closer to the tree line with the same filter, the apparent speed of the trees moving across the frame is higher, which introduces noticeable motion blur in a pleasing way. Now in this filter set, Freewell includes an ND1000. And I was curious whether or not I'd ever actually use that filter, and I got my answer pretty quickly. I wanted to get a time-lapse of the traffic on this bridge during the day with lots of motion blur in the vehicles, but I wanted to keep everything else relatively crisp. Using an ND64 wasn't getting the shutter speed slow enough, but I thought I'd show you these hyperlapses side by side for comparison anyway. On a different day, I tried again at 12 noon using the ND1000 filter. My shutter speed was only around 1/4 of a second. And yes, there was some motion blur, but not really enough. I guess I needed an even darker filter. But the next best thing was to wait until late afternoon and try again with the ND1000. So around sunset, I set a hyperlapse waypoint mission without a filter, and this is the video that DJI created. Then I put the ND1000 filter on the Mini 4 Pro and finally got the amount of motion blur I was going for. Over the past few weeks of testing out these filters, going through the process of trial and error was definitely a good learning experience for me. I haven't really experimented much with filters in the past, but these have definitely sparked some creative ideas that I'd like to try. We will continue to use them in different situations, so keep an eye out for those videos. In the meantime, if you're looking for a set of filters for your Mini 4 Pro and want to give Freewell a try, consider using one of the links in the description, which will help support the channel at no extra cost to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Ready Set Drone.